At the beginning of my current research project, I set out to explore the effect of consumer culture on mental health, scrutinising the influences of media, social media, and advertising on emotional well-being. I'd adopted a firmly postmodernist and constructed approach to visualise my ideas and represent my opinions, but as I became more engaged with the work of documentary photographers such as Abigail Heyman and Helen Levitt, I found myself drawn to a more realist aesthetic. And so, on starting this current module, I was feeling a little bit lost and confused in terms of my visual approach. Instead, I focused on my subject and returned to Guy Debord's idea that the proliferation of images and desires alienates us, not only from ourselves, but from each other. Drawing on the work of Valerie Berlin, who experiments with digital post-production and injects her photographs with a sense of fantasy and eerie surrealism, I began to look at combining street portraits with images of adverts and common media messages overlaid, examples of which can be seen in the portfolio development section of my CRJ. I think that these images work in the sense that they successfully visualise a sense of consumers being overwhelmed by media messages and impossible aspirations imposed on us in a commodity-driven culture. I also feel that this is kind of what the effect of social media would look like if we were able to see it. However, as a visual style, it's a little bit messy, and it's maybe not something that I would want to or even could apply to all my work. But more importantly, in terms of a personal project, these images lack the emotional connection to the subject discussed by Grant Scott when he reviews photographers like Jim Mottram and Peter Dench in The New Global Landscape. Scott cites that an emotional attachment can lead to a project being much more emotionally powerful and influential than its initial concept. So, feeling that I needed to try and reconnect with my work and really explore what my own personal relationship to my subject was, I started to think more about how this commodity-driven society affects my own mental health and well-being personally, and how I experienced this within my own life. I began to experiment with a mixed media approach, merging images of myself with scanned objects such as receipts, banknotes, prescriptions, and signifiers of my own anxieties about money, debt, work, and health. Influenced by the artist collaboration Kennard Phillips, these images align with the postmodern visual style of some of my earlier work, and they do confront some of the ideas that I'm trying to communicate. But I do think that they can also be problematic. Some of the cultural signifiers used in them aren't universal, but specific to a geographical location or a particular time or culture. Also, the way that the images are constructed leaves little room for the viewer to interpret them. My opinion as the author encourages a dominant reading. So, reflecting on this aspect of my work in progress, the words of Shirley Reid resonate. My aim as an artist is not to dictate an opinion, but to raise questions. I have to find a balance between explaining too much or too little. In thinking about what I wanted to do with my photography post-MA, I began to consider how I could use the work that I'm producing now within community projects, collaborations, and art therapy workshops. I identified my key outcomes to be engaging in conversations about mental health, collaborating with community groups and organisations to produce group projects, and helping people that suffer from anxiety, stress, and depression. Using a photo montage approach is a technique that has been successful for other photographers that work in these areas, such as Wendy Yould and Dominika Dovgiala, and I think that it will be a useful tool for me in art therapy workshops. But having previously incorporated it in workshops that I run, and wanting to explore other means of phototherapy and using photography as a way of self-reflection, I revisited the diary style format that I've used in the previous module. I began recording an image a day, particularly at times when I felt stressed or anxious or weak. This is an exercise used by Dovgiala to prepare her subjects in her project Portraits of the Mind. And it's also been the driving idea behind the One Project, an online community where people create photo stories or diaries around their personal experiences with mental health, which are then either shared and published online or kept as personal and private thoughts. The Journal of Psychological Science claims that writing a thought a day in a diary can combat anxiety and help to throw away negative thoughts. The same principle can be achieved through photography. I really like the whole idea of recontextualizing the selfie as a personal record rather than a public statement, and how this can change the way in which we think about ourselves, giving us an opportunity to reflect on continuity, challenges, and achievements in a more honest way. To explore this idea further, I invited one of my friends who suffers from extreme anxiety and panic attacks to try this exercise. These images can be seen in my portfolio development area of my CRJ, and I intend to take this work forward in the next module, planning a workshop that uses both the diary style and the mixed media portrait to explore self. I found as I became more comfortable with being in front of the camera, and as I was introduced to the work of photographers Astrid Verhoff and Trish Morrissey, that I also began to experiment with using photography as a method of escapism. There was something about Morrissey's work in particular that connected with me. I like the way that it's performative and yet still maintains a kind of photographic transparency, that unique photographic quality that Barthes describes as the truth of the image, or perfectly analogue to reality. Drawing inspiration from Morrissey and the way that she creates a persona, or different characters that she can act out in her images, I used a character from one of my favourite books that relates to mental health, Sylvia Plath's Bell Jar. This book is one that I've revisited many times since I was a teenager, partly because I feel such affinity with the main protagonist, who struggles with the fast-paced New York lifestyle and suffers from acute insomnia. Through reimagining themes from the novel for my own life, I felt I was able to produce a more sophisticated set of images that engaged in conversations about stress, anxiety, and depression in modern Western culture. I think that these images are slightly ambiguous, and this is why that I've chosen to include text with them in my work in progress portfolio. But I do feel that the technique is helping me to work towards achieving a visual style that I'm happier with, and I would like to continue developing this in the next module, looking at artists such as Tom Hunter and Kirsty Mitchell, whose work draws on literature and historic imagery reimagined for a modern audience. Over the past few months, I have struggled with the direction of my project, and I think that this sense of confusion is reflected in my work in progress portfolio. However, at the end of this module, I'm feeling a relieving sense of clarity and purpose, and I'm happy that I'm producing work that I feel is more personal and more meaningful to me. And excited to see how this develops now in the last module.